Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is Haider Mehdi, and this is the first in our series of programs on the Canadian election being held in Canada in a few weeks' time. The temperature is hot, very hot. The leaders had a debate last night in French. Some stumbled, some achieved great success. I think the jury is out on that. So, our first person who we have invited in our series on the Canadian elections is none other than Ehab Mustapha. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bonjour. Good afternoon, Ehab, and welcome to our program.
Walaikum salam. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, Sayyid Haider.
My pleasure, Ehab. Just so that people know, Ehab is the National Democratic Party, the NDP candidate for Erin-Mills and Mississauga. And we will let Ehab tell us a bit about himself before we proceed further. Ehab, over to you.
Thanks again. So I was born and raised in Canada. I'm Palestinian originally. I've been in Mississauga basically my whole life. I studied molecular biology and genetics at the University of Guelph. Did my master's in global affairs at the University of Toronto, where I had a chance to also work at the Canadian Embassy to the UAE, working on some investment, essentially research on sovereign wealth funds. And for the last 12 years, I've been consulting multinationals on how to make mergers and acquisitions, along with other items within financial technology. And I've decided in the last few years to get involved into politics. Something that's really important to me is that I've seen, as I've knocked door to door on Canadians and seeing how they're living and what's going on, one particular story stands out for me. A woman that was a former Olympian basketball player was living with her parents for the last 20, 30 years because of something that happened to her, and she was unable to purchase a home. And this is just one of many stories that have gotten me engaged in politics.
Excellent. Ehab, this is such a breath of fresh air to see professionals, subject matter specialists, people who've actually done real work in their life, so to speak, and not have just a political legacy. Either their parents were there or whatever. But that's very kind of you. So, Ehab, before we get into your agenda, and I think it's a little more important for us to understand why you actually chose this now kind of a career or a life forever.
Well, it became a question of necessity. We're entering into a part of Canadian history in which it's very difficult and very dark for the average Canadian. A Canadian economy is one where people are put over profits. And that's always been the legacy of Canada, where we can, like the United States, build intergenerational wealth, have upward mobility. But unlike the United States, if a Canadian broke his leg or broke her arm, then essentially we'd fall back on healthcare and all of that, and it wouldn't break the bank, trying to get medical aid. But the way that Canada is moving, in terms of the policies that are being put forth by the ruling parties, is to make us more privatized and to move away from that Canadian identity. And I want to make sure that as a Canadian who's lived his whole life here, that Canada remains the Canada that we've always seen our whole lives. And that's what's really pushed me to get into politics. As a personal story, my father is a car salesman. 20 years ago when he bought his first house, it was $5,000 down payment, $200,000 for the house. And we were able to finally stop moving around so much. As a car salesman, sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down, depending on sales. And we were relatively poor at the time, but he was still able, as a single man, working single income, be able to buy us a home. And now 20 years later, I think to my uncle, who recently got sick for 50 years, he was a translator. He was working by himself, standing on his own 2 feet, very proud, and eventually got to the point where he got very sick as well, and he wasn't able to work anymore. And he's been bounced around the system trying to get support for a Canadian that's worked, but unfortunately, he's unable to get that support. And that's a reality for many Canadians. And as I looked around and saw that reality, I decided that it's high time for me to get involved, because if I want to see change, I can't just ask for it. I got to do it myself.
Excellent. So why the NDP? Why not the Conservatives or the Liberals or even the Greens?
Well, the NDP has been very consistent with how they represent Canadians. Canadians need, and we rely on a lot of the things that the NDP has put forth. Medicare is something that Tommy Douglas put forward first, and then it became adopted nationally. Pharmacare is something that Jagmeet has put together. Diabetes medication, dental care. The 5-day work week is also something that has come from NDP and its predecessors. So the NDP has always been a champion of the cause for the people. And I think it's extremely important for us that we have that representation, even if it's a minority or opposition government. The NDP works hard, whether it's on Ontario or whether across Canada, to make sure that Canadians are represented, that they have what they need. And it became a clear question of me, that do I want to join a party that represents billionaires and make sure that billionaires keep getting richer, or do I want to see Canadians protected? And the NDP is clearly the ones protecting Canadians.
And we've seen Jagmeet being extremely aggressive on many issues, your party leader, but the NDP has lost a lot of ground since Trudeau announced the election and stepped down, and then Mark Carney came up from being perhaps one of the equal one-third partner with the Liberals and the Conservatives. The NDP is now to a very poor, maybe a fourth. Why is that?
I think it's a very unique time that Canada is in right now, right? So we had a blue sweep that was predicted last year. We felt that, after 10 or 12 or 13 years of Liberal government, that essentially, we've had enough of the Liberals, that they've not helped us in terms of economic growth and living conditions. So everyone swang the other way and decided that probably Conservatives were going to be, the majority government. And that's what the projections look like, at least. And then we had Trump come in, and we saw what a conservative government really looks like. And when we saw what that looks like, Canadians were not satisfied with that reality, and they wanted something different. So then they looked at the possibility of. Sorry, I'm not sure if I lost you there for a moment.
No, I'm there. You'll keep seeing me go in and out. We'll edit this out.
Yeah, I just want to make sure. Yeah, okay. So with Trump coming back and with Trump getting reelected, we saw what a conservative / right-wing Republican government looks like, and Canadians became a little bit wary of that, along with Trump's threats of annexing Canada and the tariffs, and it became really a period of uncertainty. And in that uncertainty, the Liberals changed their face from Trudeau to Carney, and Canadians felt that perhaps there is a chance for us to be able to weather the storm, because let's be honest, the United States is talking about annexing us. I mean, I don't remember a time in my life or any time in recent history where the United States was considering annexing, Canada or any sovereign threat to Canada's soil in a very long time. So this is not something that we can all scoff at. This is something very serious to worry Canadians. But also the tariffs, which he's using as whether it's a tool to get us to negotiate or to bring us to our knees to make it easy to annex us, are also a very serious threat to our. As a result, Canadians are feeling this unease, and into periods of unease and uncertainty, and along with the fact that already we're feeling that economic struggle, I think it's very common for people to look for very strong populist leaders that are coming with a messaging of power and strength, even if there's not much substance behind it. It's just a new face with a new, kind of perspective, or what looks like a new perspective. And that's just causing Canadians to really jump on the strategic voting bandwagon more than they're really making that, general assessment they may have done over the last couple of years, as they saw the Liberals to themselves, okay, the NDP needs to do this and the Conservatives need to do this. They're just jumping in with, I'm afraid I need to do something. And as we know, decisions made out of fear are not always the best decisions.
Right. So, and do you think, and before we go into your personal agenda about the election, which is remarkable, when I heard about it earlier, who do you think carried the evening in this election, in the debate?
Well, it's a question for me that you may feel I'm a bit biased, but I really felt that Jagmeet was very strong. I thought that there were a lot of moments in which he stood up for what's just and what's right. The NDP is very strong on their anti-genocide and very pro-human rights stance. And I think calling out Carney was one of the highlights for me about not naming this as a genocide, what's happening in Gaza.
Very powerful, very powerful.
Exactly. So I think he took a very strong stance. And even afterwards, when he was, questioned in some ways that he was strong with his answers. So Jagmeet really showed his charisma, but also his strength as a leader of the NDP to show that we're here, we're strong, we're not going anywhere, and that we're willing to stand up for what's right no matter what happens.
I think that's a very powerful message, Ehab, that the NDP gets across, that we're not playing to the gallery. We have fundamental values, we have fundamental principles. We will stand up and say that genocide was committed in Palestine, whether you like it or not, whether it's politically correct in North America or Europe, we will say it. That's a huge, in some ways, a huge sacrifice that I think the NDP has taken and given to be able to call out the truth and justice in the West. So kudos to you guys, NDP and Jagmeet. Coming on to you, Ehab, you've got very strong views about the Canadian economy, the Canadian identity, which is kind of getting a bit confused. Tell us a little more about that before we move forward. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you for the opportunity. So I'll start off with the Canadian economy that I touched on earlier about being much more focused on people over profits. We've gotten to a point where oligopolies across Canada are really controlling the market and not giving a chance for the rest of us as Canadians to be able to get into the market, to be able to establish ourselves, to build small businesses. Small businesses are the large majority of the Canadian economy. I believe almost 85% of businesses are small businesses, and small medium enterprises, and they have a significant portion of the GDP that they contribute as well. But when we're not giving them places to thrive and survive because oligopolies are cornering the market with their pricing or whatever else that they're doing, then essentially all Canadians suffer as a result. So I think that one of our major platforms is ensuring that all of these oligopolies in some form or the other are either taxed appropriately or they're broken up, or that public investment allows for very healthy competition. And I think in any capitalist market or any sort of economic market that is poised for growth, we need healthy competition, to ensure that new ideas, new products, new services are coming in, but also that prices don't go rampant because of oligopolies cornering their market. So just to give you a few examples of these, we want to build over 3 million homes in the next few years on public property or public land, rather, through public investment that is not going to be acquired or doesn't have the potential to be acquired by private organizations. Some studies have shown that up to 43% of the homes that were bought in the last couple of years were bought by private institutions and not by individuals. So
really, 43%, eh?
Yeah, up to 43% for some of these studies. So it's actually outrageous how much private institutions are able to buy up land and buy up homes or properties and then turn them into rental properties. So it's also part of the idea is capping the rental to make sure there's more representation for tenants, but also ensuring that we can public co-ops for groceries, like in many areas and ways in which we can break up these oligopolies. I think that's what's really critical for us, finding ways to tackle the issue right at its heart, which is that we don't want to solve the problem with just giving free money or reducing taxes or whatever, which is not going to help us in the long term, but rather finding ways to really target these oligopolies and market problems head on and allow us to develop that Canadian economy that brings it back for the people, where Canadians can build that intergenerational wealth without having the erosion of social services that we depend on. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, that's a tough one about generational wealth on one hand and the social welfare state on the other. It's a tough one. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, no, it's a good point, but I think moving less away from the social welfare state, but more of, Canada for the last 20, 30 years, how we, the way that Canadians have made money and lived up before this last 10 years of things are getting really tumultuous, is that we've been able to build wealth. We've been able to have, very strong GDP growth, but at the same time, we've been able to go to the hospital and go see the, doctor, and we're not waiting outrageous amounts of time. And I think that reality is not too far away from, recent history, where if we want to go back to it, it's not a far stretch of the imagination. We have to just make sure good policy is not whittling away at these institutions and then, saying, well, hospitals aren't working as well as they should be because we're putting in bad policy, and then saying, well, the solution then has to be privatization. I think it's a very, sinister way of approaching our public services, and then it's whittling away those services when they all have been working really well, and we can continue to keep them working well.
Thank you. I know another very close, something very close to your heart is a collage, maybe a kaleidoscope of immigration, voice for the Muslims, Islamophobia, the cultural challenges that Muslims face in terms of their belief faith systems, the kind of education that is being taught in schools. Um, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so one of the points you mentioned earlier that I'd like to touch on, and that touches on this along with my third point that I'll come on directly on your point. Um, a Canadian identity has always been one that is rooted in human rights and diversity. Unlike the United States, we're not a melting pot where everyone comes to Canada and you basically have to be one way. There are Canadian values, there's a Canadian identity. We all love our hockey, we love our maple syrup, we love the beaver, we love all these things that have made us Canadians, the maple leaf that we stand proud in front of. But also, we're very diverse, and we have so many different voices, so many different cultures and personalities that we welcome with open arms. And me myself, I grew up around Erin Mills, and my group of friends were from Pakistan, from Afghanistan, from Scotland, Ireland, French. Like we had a whole kaleidoscope. It was like the UN and a group of friends. And every day, whether I go to someone's house and have rotis or doubles or whatever it is, or Arabic food, it was just, we were all Canadians at the end of the day. And this sort of identity as Canadians, the one that's rooted in human rights, goes back, very far from even when we had the Underground Railroad, right? And when there was slavery in America, they would come to Canada as a safe haven because we did not adopt those same mentalities. And also, Rwandan genocide, we had the white helmets of Canadians there to stand against the genocide. And even though, still the atrocities happened, we tried as much as we can as Canadians to do what we could, because Canadians have had that long history of being brave and trying to stand up for what's right, no matter what the cost. And more recently, I think a lot of Canadians, and I would say, Arabs, Palestinians, Muslims, but generally Canadians, are very distraught with what they're seeing happening in the Middle East. Nobody likes to see carnage and death and destruction, but also having, what the International Criminal Court and many other organizations call a genocide happening, unfolding before our eyes, is something that no Canadian wants to stomach. Having children dismembered, having medics shot, without any justifiable reason, and all of these other things are extremely difficult to stomach as Canadians, and all of us are feeling that anguish. And returning to that Canadian identity, where it's about human rights, where we stand up for what's just and what's correct. I mean, more recently, I think, to the Liberal government's unveiling of this sort of bubble law that's been happening on the municipal level, which essentially says that you cannot obstruct vulnerable institutions. So essentially, if that someone were to protest in front of a synagogue or a mosque or a public school, that essentially that the city would issue bylaw tickets. But now the Liberals are proposing that if they win, they're going to roll this out federally as a criminal charge, or whether it's just a fine of $20,000 or a criminal offense. And this is very concerning, because as Canadians in our Bill of Rights and the way that our Constitution is, stands forth, is that we are allowed to protest. We're allowed to protest and have, peaceful civic discourse, sometimes on the street, of, discontent, and say that we're not happy with the way that things are going. But and the police currently, as they have now, they have the power that if someone is, invoking hate speech or they're doing something incorrect, that is a criminal offense. And someone can say you're in front of a mosque or a synagogue or a church and you're doing something that is inappropriate or hateful or whatever it is, and we won't condone this. Or if it's violent, then the police can do something about it. But now with this a law expanding, if the Liberals are to put it in place, now it opens up the door to interpretation of what does it mean to be obstructing, a vulnerable institution. And that's something I'm very concerned that as Canadians, not only has the Liberal government been a little bit hesitant about actually calling this a genocide or, upholding the International Criminal Courts. I mean, they did eventually say that they'll uphold the warrants, but after a long period of time, or funding UNRWA or whatever it may be. But fundamentally, this is about human rights, right? We're talking about human rights, whether it's in Pakistan, whether it's in Canada, whether it's in Palestine, and wherever else around the world. It's just what the new world order after World War II established was that we're coming together as the United Nations, whether it was first the League of Nations and then the United Nations, to stand up together for what is correct, what is right. We don't want to have any more atrocities. We don't want anything like the Holocaust to ever happen again, because we stand up for what's just and what's right. And Canada has always been very firmly attached to that. And I want to make sure that that identity is not lost, that we ensure that we continue to stay to that elements of diversity and human rights, whether it's freedom of speech, freedom to protest, and to uphold international law wherever it may be.
And there's this question of, I think associated with this is now an emerging question of transnational repression. We've seen foreign nationalities being targeted from their home countries. You're familiar with the attack on the Sikh leader who was assassinated by people belonging to an intelligence agency of India. I myself have been a target of transnational repression for speaking up against the fascist authoritarian government in Pakistan. Many others are being targeted here. What's your view on that?
Fundamentally, I think it goes back to what I was saying about human rights generally. And fundamentally, at one point, we're also talking about sovereignty. And within a sovereign border, there cannot be anything that happens that's not within the laws of the land, and to ensure that nothing encroaches on our sovereignty. And in Canada, we're very proud to have our sovereignty. We're very proud of being Canadian. And also, with what's happening with the United States, with them talking about annexing us, it's extremely important that we maintain and reinforce that sovereignty. So across the board, I believe that it's very important that we maintain that sovereignty. We maintain rule of law. When the rule of law breaks down, when we no longer have these rules and we have order, then chaos ensues, and chaos brings fear, it brings death, it brings destruction. So in whatever case, it has to be that the rule of law stands and that sovereignty is respected no matter what.
Thank you. I'm just going to take last two questions, because the rule of law is close to something that I'm working on, and a lot of Canadian Pakistanis are working on. Currently, Pakistan is under military authoritarianism, fascism. There is a facade of a civilian government, massive abuses of human rights, crimes against humanity. The most popular leader is in jail illegally, unconstitutionally. The elections were won by one political party. That election was stolen. The US has presented a bill in the Congress called the Global Magnitsky Sanctions Act against Asim Munir, the army chief. It's called the Pakistan Democracy Act. We haven't seen anything substantial coming out of Canadian MPs, politicians, government leaders, because Canada has been a voice for freedom and democracy across the world. Do you think the NDP will take a position on Pakistan like people in the US have done?
If you'll permit me, I actually want to read a statement that came out from Haider McPherson about this. So I'll read it, just the highlights.
Yes.
New Democrats are alarmed by the deteriorating political, economic, and human rights situation in Pakistan, including reports of political violence following the arrest of former Prime Minister Imran Khan by paramilitary forces. Democracy, the rule of law, and human rights must always be protected. We call on this government to urge Pakistani authorities to respect the rights and freedom of journalists, civil society organizations, and all citizens. New Democrats stand with Pakistani Canadians who are rallying across the country in solidarity with the loved ones in Pakistan. So this is Haider McPherson actually in 2023. So, like you said earlier, and I love that you said this, the NDP is not choosing and selecting who they believe human rights are for, or they're, kind of being discriminatory, or even changing their tune depending on, where things go to garner votes. They fundamentally believe in the truth, and they believe in what's right, and they've been standing by this for a very long time, and we continue to stand by this. So when it comes to what's happening in Pakistan, I believe that the rule of law has broken down. To have someone like Imran Khan be wrongly imprisoned, and to have him, brought up on charges and all of that. So definitely the NDP stands against that, and we have made our statement very clear. And we want to make sure that the rule of law is always upheld wherever it is. Again, I think it's very strong. It's unfortunate that I have to say this so emphatically, because you would hope and wish that that this was the case and always will be the case, that the rule of law, international rights, and international law is upheld. But in the last 2 years, I think we've seen very strongly that this is a rules or based order, which is rules for thee, not for me, and that's unfortunate to see, because the rule of law has to be across the board all the time, and no matter what, no matter who. And Pakistan is one example of ensuring that we have the rule of law stand, and Canada will definitely stand for that with a new democratic government.
So I'm so glad you brought up Heather McPherson. It's a very powerful statement from her. The reason I'm presenting her image here, she actually was the sponsor of a petition that we had filed just before the assembly, the parliament was dissolved, in which a petition was presented, which she was leading, to be read out, hopefully eventually to be passed as a law, calling for sanctions against the military authoritarianism in Pakistan. Unfortunately or fortunately, because the parliament was dissolved,
Yes.
that petition is now infructuous. But we hope that once the next one comes, we will maybe seek you out, also Ehab, to sponsor it, lead it, along with Heather McPherson. We want it to be a multi-party sponsor. We look for people in the Conservatives, amongst the Greens, amongst the Quebecois, of course, the Liberals, to sponsor such a petition. Would you be willing to do that? I know I'm putting you on the spot.
Well, I think I see here petition E6470, and
Yes.
it looks like it's almost 500 plus signatures. I looked this up before we spoke just to kind of to see that. And anything like this that Heather McPherson is backing is something that I think is always right, and I would be happy to always support rule of law, what's truth, making sure that human rights are upheld. I think this is something for me that's very dear to my heart, because I believe that all Canadians, all human beings deserve dignity, they deserve justice, and that we have to ensure that democratic order and process is always held in place. So I'm always happy to support anything to that effect.
Excellent. Last question, sir. Ehab, there's this question of NDP as a party, and then there's this question of Ehab Mustapha as the Mississauga Erin-Mills candidate.
Yes.
Why, even if people don't support the NDP for whatever reason, but people why would they go and vote for Ehab in your constituency?
It's a good question. I think that from people seeing me and hearing me, I have heard lots of great feedback about seeing a great potential in leadership for this country. So what I would say is that I don't believe in asking for trust. I believe that you demonstrate your actions and your beliefs through your words and your deeds, and people will then see that and then make their assessment. And I hope that what I've demonstrated so far and what I will continue to demonstrate is one that has character that's worthy of trust, and that to see that I'm ready to stand for all Canadians, for justice, for peace, for economic equality, to make sure that the Muslim community is represented, Muslim community values, which are very in sync with Canadians. I always think the lowest hanging fruit for me is that it's a basic rule in Islam that your neighbor does not go hungry. Now, it doesn't say your Muslim neighbor. It says that any neighbor, if your neighbor is hungry and you're full, then you're not, completing your deeds as a Muslim. And that is a value that I know that all Canadians believe in, which is to make sure that all of us are healthy and eating well. And these are the values I want to bring to Parliament. And these are the values that I'll always espouse. And if people want to vote for me as a person, I hope that they see and they will continue to see that this is who I am, and it does not change no matter the political temperature or the climate or whatever it is. I'm here to stay, and here to stay as this type of person, inshallah.
MashaAllah, inshallah. Ehab, if I honestly was in your reading, I would vote for you.
I appreciate
And
it.
if and I'm not saying this because I don't know you, but I'm not saying, but really, you touch the heart. And I think for those people in Mississauga and Erin-Mills and your reading who want an upright, young, dynamic, honest, competent individual to represent them in the Canadian Parliament, I would urge all of you to vote for Ehab Mustapha, irrespective if your party affiliation is NDP or not, or whether it's Conservative, Quebecois, Greens, or Liberal. I endorse Ehab Mustapha. Thank you.
Sir, I really do appreciate it, and I appreciate this interview.
My pleasure. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you. And may you and people like you enter Canadian politics and hold the standard of honesty, truth, and justice and universal human rights, and create a Canada that we are all proud and happy to be part of. Thank you very much. And wish you all the best, Ehab.
Thanks again.
Assalamu alaikum wa
Appreciate it.
rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Take care.